In the previous video, Dr. Tomlinson began her discussion of differentiation by describing it as responsive teaching that is respectful of students' individual learning strengths, preferences, and readiness. In this video, Dr. Tomlinson will expand on her definition of differentiation with an examination of how successful teaching, including differentiated instruction, is proactively planned and is tailored to the needs of each student. And now, Dr. Tomlinson.
To me, differentiation is planning for the unpredictability of the classroom. You're going to have some kids who simply can't read the novels that you have in your classroom. You're going to have some kids who can't understand the science book that has been issued to every student in that grade. You're going to have some kids who know more than you do about what you're trying to teach. A really hard thing for bright little readers in the primary grades is when the teacher is teaching "This is Mr. K," and at home that kid's reading The Secret Garden, and they just would really so much love to have a real book to read, but you're kind of going with "This is Mr. K" because that's what you're supposed to do. So it's that sense of understanding that your perfect lesson plan isn't going to be perfect for everybody. Trying to say, if this method doesn't turn a kid on, what can I have ready that might? If I have kids that aren't going to be able to read the book, what methods can I use to get that material to them? A student also told me last year that he didn't think this made any sense, that it sounded like an oxymoron, that you can't plan for unpredictability. I think that's what we call life insurance, and a spare tire in the back of the car, and a little extra time built into a schedule just in case you get all the red lights or whatever it is. Truly, for me, a great way to start thinking about differentiation is just how can I shake up my classroom so there's more room for success? Can I give the kids more ways to express stuff? Can I provide more ways to take in stuff? Can I figure out different ways to get me to kids more often so that I'm more on their wavelength? How do I just loosen up the stuff? And I said to you a little while ago that I think Gardner's work, even though it has not been hugely researched, is useful. One reason it's useful is because when you start trying to plan for multiple intelligence and you've got several things going on, you have to learn to manage differently. You have to learn to give different sets of directions. You have to get better at giving kids choices and helping them make wise choices. And if nothing else, that shakes up the classroom. It opens it up just a little bit more. One point that I want to make to you that you'll hear a lot of our presenters emphasizing as well, I think, is that the best differentiation is proactively planned. When we look at teacher definitions of differentiation, one of the first things I learned when I came to the university and had a chance to actually do some research is that, in fact, most teachers will say, "I differentiate instruction." And when I went into the classrooms to see it, I couldn't find it. And I finally thought, okay, either they're not telling me the truth or I'm an idiot, and I don't want to believe I'm an idiot, and I know not everybody's lying to me, so where's the problem here? And so I started asking a question. When I see you differentiate today, what will I see you do? And every teacher answered me, "Oh, I'm differentiating when I do this and this." And honestly, what they said to me most of the time made sense. I'm differentiating because I let kids decide who to work with. Could that help some kids? Yeah. Is it enough to help a kid who's 5 years behind with reading catch up? No. I differentiate because when a kid finishes an assignment, I let them keep reading. Is that a good thing for a kid who gets through faster? Sure. Is that adequate for a kid for whom the book is already too easy? No, it just means they can finish a too easy book faster. And what I discovered was that many of us call differentiation a reactive thing, meaning we come in with one lesson plan for everybody, and we really mean for everybody to do that one lesson plan. We worked hard on it. It's how we meant it to be, and we're ready. We've got the materials, we know where we're headed, we've got the stuff. And then when it doesn't work because it's too hard for somebody, because somebody's missing a step, because somebody finished, we improvise and try to give this kid a little more work or talk to this kid a little more to explain it again. Again, those are not terrible things, but that's not good enough to help a second language learner propel ahead. it's not good enough to really challenge a child who's 3 years advanced. It's not good enough to help a kid who's just having a terrible life at home and needs some individual attention to be able to stay on board with us. So we want to talk to you also about proactive differentiation, meaning that up front, before I finish planning my lesson, I'm going to try to have a sense of where the various kids are and what they need. And then I'm going to go into my classroom with 2 things or 3 things or 4 ways to try to get it done. And it's planned with matches of kids to avenues of getting somewhere. I'm still going to have to improvise. Teaching has that in it. That's just a part of teaching. But if I'm improvising from 3 options that I've designed by looking at my kids, I'm going to have to do much less improvisation. And I'm also doing something that's coherently planned for kids rather than one plan which isn't really fitting everybody and then trying to stretch to sort of Procrustean thing, get kids to fit in there. I love this cartoon. It is a metaphor for me. I don't know if it works for you, but these little engineers, I guess, designed this bridge, and then somebody built it for them, and now they've gone to look at it. And it may not have worked quite like they meant. And so one of them says to the other one after he looks at it, "So much for winging it, Ed. Next time we plan the bridge." And why this is metaphorical for me is that I think our job as teachers is to connect content in kids. And when we're not really studying how to make that happen, how do I connect this with these 4 kids who are having this difficulty, then at the end of the day, the content and the kids don't connect. We've got these pieces, but they don't really come together. And so differentiation should help us avoid that. I hope that at the end of the 3 days, this will be clear to you as a philosophy from this place. Differentiation is making sure that every kid learns as much, as fast as possible by ensuring that we have absolutely clear goals. If you differentiate without clear goals, I'm just not real sure you're going to get where you're going because you're just not real sure where it is you're trying to go. So clear goals, really important. Assessing constantly to see where each kid is relative to those goals. This is where we should be. Who's ahead of me? Who's behind? Who's misunderstanding something? Who's got a chunk missing? And then once you know where you're trying to go and you see where each kid is relative to those goals, differentiation is just adjusting the instruction to help those kids who are behind leap forward and help kids who are ahead move ahead, or help kids who can't learn this way have this option instead, so that every kid can learn as much as possible, as efficiently as possible. And this, to me, just sounds an awful lot like good teaching. A lot of us see differentiation as an add-on, and I have people all the time say to me, I differentiate if I cover everything first. I used to have people say I differentiate on Friday if I can get through everything before that. And truly now I have a significant number of people every year say to me, I differentiate in May once the standards test is over. The point of differentiation is knowing where you got to get the kids and being flexible enough to get them there. And to me, it's just common sense of teaching. I want to be sure to say to you that we're going to share strategies with you here because everybody who's in a classroom wants to know Sternberg, wants to see raft assignments, wants to know how tiering could work, wants to know how to do centers better. But differentiation is not a set of strategies. It's a way of thinking about the classroom. I frequently teach people Sternberg or rafts or tiering or whatever, and then I go into classrooms and find that the best differentiation teachers do doesn't have a name. They meet with different groups. They listen to kids and respond flexibly. So that repertoire of named strategies is a great toolbox, but there are 1,000 others that don't have names that we just use constantly in the classroom. Strategies are tools to accomplish those goals of differentiation, knowing how to get kids to those goals that we have. They are no more differentiation themselves than a hammer and a saw and a screw is the house. The tools help you build the house. Tools can help you create differentiation, but differentiation is that structure of thinking, not the tools themselves. This is one of my favorite visual metaphors of differentiation, and one of you said something very much like this. You're going to have some academically tall kids in your classroom. They just grew taller faster than they're supposed to academically. You're teaching second graders. They really are fifth graders. They just happen to be in little bodies. You're also going to have some academically short kids. You're teaching in ninth grade, and really some of the kids are functioning much more in terms of literacy like fifth graders. They just haven't yet grown to where ninth graders should be. And in between, you've got kids that are a little short, sort of medium, a little tall, whatever. And our job is to bring in a rack of learning opportunities. Not 30 opportunities to every class every day, we can't do that. But to bring in enough variety over a month, over a marking period, so that the kid gets the sense, this stuff fits me. In terms of readiness, in terms of style, which might be a metaphor for learning profile, in terms of costume, which might be an interest thing. Do I want to be a policeman or a physician? If you don't do that, and by the way, you still have to tailor. You still have to try to make stuff a little better for a particular kid. If you don't do that, what you end up with is a classroom that's a lot like this. And we do this rather badly with literacy. We know what we're supposed to teach in first grade, we teach that. We know what we're supposed to teach in second grade. By fourth grade, we've decided it's not even our job to teach reading anymore, particularly that was supposed to happen earlier. And by the time we get to high school teachers across the country will say to people who sell English literature books, don't put stuff in there on how to teach the kids reading, that's not my job. This is the high school English class. And if it's not going to happen there, what is going to happen in social studies or in science or whatever? So we have kids all over the place with literacy. When we have one way of doing it, we inevitably have some kids who are just swallowed whole by that curriculum and other kids who are pinched to death. And our job's trying to avoid that, to bring in a few more sizes to help it work out for kids. Questions, thoughts about the definitions, things that you would argue with, gaps in your thinking? Yeah.
In my classroom, I have, obviously everybody does, varied levels of students. And I might have different students doing different things to accomplish the same goal. And at first, it's not fair, is what I hear from them. And it's not somebody got an easier assignment and somebody got a harder assignment, but it's a different way to reach that ending goal. And I tell them, you know, it doesn't matter who's doing what, everyone's different and has different needs, which is back to the respectful thing. And I think they understand that I'm trying to be respectful of all of their needs. It's not that I'm giving someone an easier job or a harder job because I like them more or less, but I'm trying to help them personally, individually, and that they know that I'm respecting their needs, and it helps with classroom management. I think they see that I'm respecting that. I'm not just going, oh, you don't get it, but everybody else does, so we're moving on. They know that I'm respecting their personal needs, and therefore they respect me back, and they respect others really well. I mean, when they work in groups, like I was telling my coworker, I had a student the other day who couldn't remember how to form the letter H. This is 8th grade. And nobody made fun of him. No one, oh my God. I mean, they just know that he's in a different place than they may be, or the other person across the room is, and they don't really pick on each other because they know they're all in different spots, and they may be the one that doesn't know something when everybody else does, and they will want that help. So it totally goes back to that respecting that you were talking about, and they get that I'm respecting them, and then they show respect back to each other. And
interesting. Yeah, a frustration for me with a 3-day thing like this, where it sounds like I have 6 hours with you, sounds like a lot, but it's really not at all. So I started this presentation off with, let's look at all the principles of differentiation. And then once I got that together, I thought, not unless we lock them in the room every afternoon, they can't go back to the hotel. That's not going to work. So I actually went from looking at a dozen principles to looking at 8, to looking at 6, to looking at 5, because that's just reasonable. And one of the things that we won't talk in this room so much about, although it's very important, is that whole notion of bringing kids on board, helping them understand why you're doing what you're doing. It's absolutely critical. And interestingly, these 2 slides, first to me, were a thing I did with my kids sometimes in September. I did different things different years so I didn't get bored to death. But often I would go to the Lost and Found in our school. And in middle school, you can find a wide range of sizes of clothes in that lost and found. They lose everything, so you have plenty of choices. And I would get the biggest jacket or sweater I could find out of there. And then I'd get the tiniest jacket or sweater I could find. And I'd bring them back to the class, and I would pick out of a class a really big kid and a really little kid. And I'd put the little clothing on the big kid and the big clothing on the little kid, and I was always sure to choose kids that liked being up in front of the classroom, not ones that would be embarrassed by it. And when I put the clothes on them or got them to put them on, I'd sort of say to the kids, so what do you think? Well, of course, the whole class is snickering and giggling and pointing and stuff, and the kids with the costumes on are, you know, flapping around like clowns. And then after they got past that, I'd say, what would it be like if you had to wear this all day today? Think about actual practical things that might arise that could be problematic for you. And they'd say, you know, I might fall down the stairs because my pants are, I'm tripping over the sleeves, or I couldn't even eat lunch because I can hardly move my arms in this thing. And then I'd say to them, so what if I told you you had to wear this all year? What would the year be like for you if you had to wear these clothes all year long? And the conversation got more thoughtful and more sort of focused by the kids, and they came up with amazing things. And inevitably, I just said to them, so why are we doing this? What's the point of this? And the kids would say, well, it's kind of like our classroom, isn't it? If the stuff we're trying to learn is too big for us, we feel swallowed up, and we feel like we're going to trip over everything. And if we've been studying something for 4 years and the teacher's still teaching it, we feel locked in and we can't move. So it was a way for me of having that conversation she's talking about. And it is critical for kids to understand that fair doesn't mean doing everything alike for everybody. In this class, it's going to mean finding everybody's next step and helping everybody take their next step. So when they come to you with that conversation about her work is harder than mine, her work should not be hard for her and yours easy for you. Everybody's work should be a little too hard for them, because every kid needs a challenge. And so if I've got it right, I'm going to push every kid a little further than they think they can go, and I'm going to try to help them get there. And so fair would mean making sure everybody gets what they need to succeed, not everybody getting everything, whether the size is okay or not. And I think you're absolutely right, which makes a nice segue into where we're going next. That kind of conversation and helping the kids see your respect of them in that way helps them learn to connect and respect each other. And I think you couldn't have a better sign if you've got a middle school kid who realizes a peer can't write an H and they don't tease them and make fun of them. You've just gotten a good diagnosis of a healthy environment in that classroom. Other thoughts or questions about the definitions or arguments? Yeah.
This might be a misunderstanding of my own, but I kind of thought that in my classroom, and I teach high school, so I try to do some higher order thinking, that there's times when I want the students to feel like they're in a different position. So I want them to try on the shirt that's too big, or I want them to be in the position where the shirt is too small, metaphorically, and push them outside of their comfort levels. And I guess I just kind of understood that that was part of differentiated instruction.
Yeah, I don't think we're disagreeing there. Let me try to paraphrase what I think you're saying and see if we're saying it alike. If not, correct me. But I do want to make kids uncomfortable. One of my favorite phrases is, I want you to work a bit outside of your comfort zone. Anytime we're doing something that's altogether comfortable, we're not growing. You have to have some stretch to grow. And that can be a real argument with parents of bright kids and bright kids themselves who've learned that easy A's should happen. If I give them something that really pushes them outside their comfort zone, life is not happy right in there, you know, and you can get some pretty interesting discussions with that. My job is to push you into an area where you think you can't go, and then to give you a support system that shows you that you can. And then as soon as you, it's like a handicap in golf, as soon as you get good at that level, I want to give you the next thing that you think you can't do, and I want to push you there. So I'm not talking about stuff, differentiation's not about creating easy street. It's about asking kids to do something that's a bit beyond their reach and then helping them extend the reach, but with the understanding that what is beyond the reach of one kid is too well within the reach of another and is hopeless for another. And there are no perfect answers to that. You have to keep studying the kids. Is that sort of what you're saying?
That, in that sense, and also in the sense of variety of learning, too. to take them out of the thing that they're comfortable with
okay.
and put them in a different group and have them work in a different sense to achieve the same goal too.
Yeah. Probably what you're talking about there is a learning profile thing, how you learn. And some kids learn comfortably this way, and you're suggesting I'd like you to try this way for a change. Let me tell you what Howard Gardner says about that, because it's very worthwhile. I think his comment is really spot on. He says when we really start looking, as you say, at how kids learn, what they are drawn to, we always have this inclination to say, yeah, okay, so you like this and you're good at it, but I want to push you into this new area. And so he says, what should we do about that? How should we proceed? And he says we have three opportunities, probably obligations as teachers. And he puts a little spin on a couple of those that it tweaked my thinking some. He says when you find a kid who's really good at something, and he's talking about intelligence preferences now in the same way that Sternberg would, you probably have found what that kid was born to do. In other words, if you have a child with real linguistic talent and almost inevitably they want to write stories and they want to write you notes in the journal and they sit at home sometimes and make up characters and that kind of thing, says that kid's gravitating toward his wiring, so that's good, that's okay, leave them there, that's all right. And he says don't worry about letting them overdo that. If they gravitate to that and they do that choice a little too often, that's okay, because they're practicing the thing that they probably are wired to do. But then the second thing he says goes right where you are, and that is kids are young and they don't know everything that's out there. And so by extending them and asking them to do things that they aren't always comfortable doing, they'll find some new things that are possibilities for them or that support that other thing. So feel free to stretch them some of the time. He just says don't pound so that they don't, it's okay to disproportionately do the thing that you like. But yeah, stretch them some. And then the third thing he says is, I think, important. He doesn't say find what they're weak at and keep beating on that. He says use a strength to build to a weakness. So if a kid's really lousy in an area or uncomfortable or just really uncertain, try to find out how to use a strength that they have to move them toward that weakness. And I'll give you a great illustration that I saw in a North Carolina classroom. So Friday afternoon, kids were kind of doing catch-up stuff. Some kids needed to work a little more on some science. Teacher was reading with some kids, variety of things going on for the last hour or so of the day. And there were two boys seated in the corner on the floor working with something that looked kind of like Legos. They were pretty sophisticated, but building some stuff. And I hadn't paid too much attention to them because I was watching what she was doing with the reading and the other kids. But I had noticed that what those boys were building was not something I could have built. It was pretty amazing. And I saw her go over to the kids and make a comment a couple of times. And then finally, maybe 20 minutes before the bell rang, she went over and sat on the floor with them. And she said, you know, guys, every time you build something, I say the same thing. But it really is the truth that I am always just astonished by what you see. Your designs are so original and they're intricate and they just always make me think. They're never something I would have thought of to do. So she studied again for a minute and she said, you know what I'm worried about is that over the weekend when the custodians come in to clean, this might get broken or taken apart, and your friends who are looking at it from a distance now won't have any record of what you did, and so they won't know how to try it themselves. So I'm wondering if you'd mind for the last 10 or 15 minutes of class kind of trying to draw a sketch of this, but more importantly, tell us step by step what we would do to try to reconstruct something like this if we wanted to do it. And the little guy said, yeah, that was fine, and so they went and got their paper and talked about what to do and took turns writing, and bell rang and they went home. And I still hadn't paid too much attention to it, but what she told me later was that those two boys were writing refusers. They're kids who don't think they can write and they hate it. They find it painful mentally and physically, and so they won't write. If she had said to them, oh guys, it's Friday afternoon and it would make me so happy if you'd write me a story, she would have had to fight them for the whole hour and they wouldn't have gotten anything done except make a mess. But when she said your building is beautiful, and I'd like to preserve that for the other kids, would you mind writing down how to do it? They didn't even think they were writing. They just thought they were telling people for posterity, you know, what to do with this thing they had built, which was pretty impressive. That's using a strength, the building, to bridge to the weakness, the writing. And that we can do that in any subject. How do I lure you into this? How do I find the road that you're willing to walk down? Alfred Tatum is an interesting guy who writes about literacy in African American males. And he says something a little different than a lot of other people say. We tend to think when you have kids who are turned off by reading, and many black high school students are, certainly not all of them, but we don't have very good skills in reaching those kids often with real passion. And a lot of people will say, get them some easy reader books, you know, some things that are within their independent reading level or just the right challenge level, and let them read the interesting books and make it high interest but low readability. And Tatum says he's never found that to work with anybody yet. He says by that time the kids are turned off of school, they're angry at things that they see in society, there are all sorts of issues starting to boil up inside them, which is frequently the case in adolescence for all of us. And he says what he finds works really well is to find books that deal with those issues, books that college kids read, books that adults read that sort of unpack those issues. And he says once he gives those kids those books, and he talks to them first about the ideas and says, now let's see what somebody's writing about, the kids will kill themselves to try to get that read. And then he can teach the vocabulary, and then he can teach how to unlock text. But it's book kids are dying to read because they're relevant to them, and they unpack those ideas. I think that's a similar kind of notion. Take an idea somebody's crazy about and use that idea as the bridge to the reading. Don't, as one of my colleagues was telling me yesterday about a high school class where they were trying to make sure that the right kids took honors English, and the kids had to read a James Joyce short story and write about what it meant. Well, I'm sorry, I have no idea what James Joyce is saying, and I'm not just real sure I think James Joyce knew what he was saying. But I can just guarantee you that if you've got a lot of kids from low-income backgrounds who are going to have to read and explain James Joyce in order to get in that class, you can just go ahead and check them off the list right now. Give me something I care about, and I'll go there.
So how do you feel about, sorry.
That's okay.
You said you like to be shouted at sometimes. We were just discussing this last night over dinner. We're giving the ARI test to our students, and we were talking about some of our low socioeconomic kids. And we have a couple of girls who we have to ask to quit reading the books that they've chosen from the public library. But when we go to give them the ARI test, their comprehension is so low. And we were saying, I bet if we gave them an ARI test based on information on their background knowledge, they would score proficient. So we were discussing, is that ARI true assessment of comprehension when I mean, they don't know what a blood transfusion is, or somebody nonchalantly saunters down the hall. I have no idea what that is. But if you ask them about things that they know about and they live, their comprehension would be different. So we were just discussing that when we go through these tests. And those books, I mean, we can't get enough of those books. They're constantly getting taken and not brought back because they're passing them around. And I mean, that's great. We think, oh my gosh, they're reading. We have to ask them to stop reading. But when we go to test them, it doesn't matter.
Well, I think you've got two issues, and I'm not going to give you an answer that makes your job any easier, your life any happier, but you've got two issues. One is getting a kid to pass a test. The other is preparing them for life. When you've got kids that are reading, you've got that long-term thing in much better shape. If I've learned to love reading, I'm going to be a different person when I'm 18 or 25 than I would if I hated all the books I had. So I do anything I could to encourage that. In terms of the test, I guess a couple of things that I'd think of there would be, are there any ways that you can make connections between the things they need to read and the things they want to read? In other words, by having them make arguments about why their books are better than the other one, but being specific about characters and about, you know, the stuff that you have to introduce. The other would be to say they may be reading and understanding those books that they are loving, but they may not be metacognitively aware of comprehension strategies and how you unlock meaning and how you figure out words in context. So trying to sometimes, now I wouldn't want to superimpose so much of that other stuff on their books that they learn to hate those too, but trying to help them use the comprehension skills in a very aware way with their books. And it may then be that if there's a set of vocabulary they need to know, like nonchalant or whatever it is, that trying to do those things, even with saying, you know, here's a list of words for that we need to work with this week, find characters in your books that are nonchalant and tell us how you know that, and trying to make some of those connections would be good. I don't think you can necessarily discount everything that you need, I mean, that you're required to do and that they need, but I might try to keep their stuff in the mix and in the foreground when I could. And I also find sometimes that if kids can really read and talk about the things they love, they're more willing to go with you for part of the time too, because there's both things, and theirs have been acknowledged as really important.
As Dr. Tomlinson pointed out, the goal of differentiating your instruction should be to provide each and every student what he or she needs to succeed. In the next video, Dr. Tomlinson explains how differentiation involves a process from a growth mindset to positive student-teacher connection, and finally evolves into a trusting community where everyone gets their needs met while respecting the needs of others.